America faces new and evolving challenges in the 21st century global political economy. Maintaining America's status as a global leader will require innovation and a capacity to compete with the best in the world. This will require that the investments and strategies in education, innovation, and securities keep pace with the new realities of our changing world. Joining us to discuss these important issues today are Admiral Mike Mullen, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Martin O'Malley, the governor of Maryland, and Carly Fiorina, chairman of Good 360 and former chairman and CEO of Hewlett-Packard. Our moderator is Andrea Mitchell, chief foreign affairs correspondent for NBC News and host of Andrea Mitchell Reports on MSNBC. Please welcome them.
Well, thank you to the P. Peterson Foundation and to all of you and to my distinguished colleagues here. Michael has outlined the problem that we all face. And it occurs to me that the Council on Foreign Relations and other groups have taken a look at education and competitiveness, and Condoleezza Rice and Joel Klein's study reporting that our education crisis is a national security problem, which is something I think that many of us agree with. So I wanted to ask you, Admiral Mullen, first, what you think we need to do to be more competitive in this atmosphere with the education system as it is now. What would you attack first?
Well, I actually, in my public speaking, get asked oftentimes what keeps me up at night, and number one on that list is our debt, and number two is our K-12 education system. And we've been talking about this for 10 or 20 or 30 years, and yet our overall competitiveness, if you look at the international comparisons with tests, we keep falling. And I actually think that if we don't fix this, not just keep talking about it, if we don't fix it, that our overall competitiveness as a nation is going to continue to erode. And we're not going to have the graduates that can compete, particularly in science and engineering and math, that are required when we see right in front of us in our own schools so many students from other countries who are killing us in every single measure. The amount of time they work, what their scores are, what they take on in terms of their futures. I also believe, and I'm not an education expert, but I also believe that we're going to have to figure out how to start at the, when they are 5 years old. I thought there was a great piece on 60 Minutes on Sunday night with Paul Tudor Jones, who tried to invest in kids that were entering high school and failed and didn't really get it right until he started when they were in the first grade. And that's been my own experience. As an American citizen, I'm actually confused in terms of what the answer is, because I've seen the charter school piece, certainly the whole issue of the business approach to education. I'm not convinced that's the right answer, but I do consider it to be a huge threat to our country, not just national security. I think it's a real threat to who we are, who we're going to be in the 21st century.
And Governor O'Malley, in the political context, you have to face a growing population of people divided not only by economic opportunities, but divided by educational opportunities, which then is predictive of their future economic opportunities. And some would suggest, I think I am one who believes this, just as a bystander in watching it, that this is a fundamental threat to our democracy. You've had great success in Maryland in the educational system and in making people more competitive. What are you doing that works? What have you done or tried that hasn't worked? And how do you approach it as a political leader?
Well, in our state, we believe that how much a person learns, as you just said, will determine how much that person earns. So we've understood, I suppose, more acutely than perhaps some other states, that we need to be able to have the fortitude to make the investments necessary to give our kids ever higher levels of education. And so that's what we've done. I mean, we have been named the #1 public schools in America now 5 years in a row. No state has done a better job of holding, thank you, proud Marylander. No state has done a better job of holding down the cost of college tuition. We went 4 years in a row without a penny's increase to college tuition in state. Why did we do these things? Not only because it was the right thing to do, but we understand that this is what makes an innovation economy. All of the tough choices we've made in terms of record cuts to our budget, but also the smart investments in education is about one thing and one thing only, and that is how do we build up an innovation economy to meet the security challenges we face? What are the skills our people need in order that we can create jobs and expand opportunity? Admiral Mullen mentioned the earlier interventions. As mayor of Baltimore, I saw very clearly the benefit that came almost immediately upon the first cohort of kids having the benefit of full-day kindergarten. We now have universal kindergarten throughout our state, and we continue to achieve at higher and higher levels, including, I might add, the highest number of kids that take and pass AP exams in high school years in STEM-related fields. So, look, you get what you pay for. The investments are important, but going to a Common Core curriculum so that as the world becomes more competitive and other nations figure out the American formula, we can continue to give our kids the skills they need. All of these things are important, and measuring performance and doing more of the things that work.
Carly, Fiorina, you've been on the front lines, you've been in the business sector, you've seen the workforce in place and the workforce among applicants. How are our graduates and postgraduates prepared for the challenges of the global economy?
Well, not prepared enough, and that's why every couple years on Capitol Hill, a string of high-tech CEOs come and ask for an increase in the quotas for H-1B visas because they have difficulty finding qualified applicants from U.S. schools and need immigrants to come and fill jobs. So we're simply not educating enough people at the standards that we need to in order to continue to have leading and globally competitive companies and states and a nation. I think both the Admiral and the Governor have said what we all agree with. Investments have to be made. This is about action and money, not simply talk. But I also think that in order to make successful investments, we have to be factual about what we know works and what we know doesn't work. So just as an example, in the state of California, if you looked at California, you would find a state that used to be at the top of the pile in terms of the quality of education that it provided, and now is at the very bottom of the pile, 47 or 48 out of 50 states. And yet it is also true that in terms of dollars per pupil, California spends up at the very top. So it isn't simply about how much money we spend. It's about where do we spend it, how do we spend it, and on what do we spend it. Another fact, because this is a political issue as well as an economic issue, obviously, the budget of the Department of Education federally has increased virtually every year for 50 years, and yet the quality of our education has gone down, proving yet again it's not just about how much money we spend, it's what do we spend it on. And I bring that up because I think the one thing that virtually everyone can agree on, particularly in K through 12 education, the thing that makes the biggest difference in the quality of someone's education is first access to education, to the point, and so kudos to the governor and the programs they put in place in Maryland. But in addition to access, what matters most is a quality teacher in front of the classroom. And so my view is that if we're going to get serious about improving our education system, and to date there isn't sadly a lot of evidence that we yet are, a lot of talk, not a lot of action, then we have to focus on two things. What dollars spent actually have a track record of success, and what don't? And the things that don't matter, quit spending the money on them. And two, do everything possible to ensure good teachers in front of a classroom. And in many cases, there are great innovations like Teach for America that are really focused on bringing high-quality teachers into classrooms, particularly in disadvantaged communities. And sadly, many of those innovations in education are create big problems with the status quo in education.
Can I,
Admiral, please.
Let me just, if I could pick up on Teach for America. I was with, I'm teaching at Princeton, and last semester I taught 18 seniors, none of whom are going to be teachers, by the way. And I think that really hits at the issue. I agree with Carly. If we're going to fix this, and I'm a little bit confused as an American citizen about what the right answer is, so I sort of almost fall back on my own experience. I mean, people that impacted me the most in my life included the teachers that I had, period. And I don't think that's changed. So how do we take that profession and make sure that it is valued for the outcome that we want? And that means we got to recruit them, and we got to pay them, and in fact, in my view, get out of their way. And Teach for America is a terrific outfit. The concern that I have with Teach for America is they go out for one tour as a teacher, and then they go on to other things. And I don't know how high their return rate is. And I was actually sitting 3 or 4 Sundays ago with a young woman who, recent graduate from a very good university. She's in Teach for America. She's teaching in a 3rd grade in a school down in Florida. That next day, she was going to administer the standardized tests. So, and she said these 8-year-old kids were absolutely freaked out. Now, I can't remember being freaked out at 8. I can remember the nuns that got my attention at 8 years old, but not being freaked out about an exam. And then she said to me, which will stay with me a long time, if they would just let me teach. And I thought that was a great part of what we're dealing with here, trying to figure out what the right answer is.
Your point about the return rate is a very important one. I do know that from my own university, the University of Pennsylvania, last year we had more graduates going into Teach for America than finance. Though that may be because of the problems on Wall Street, but it's also because there is a spirit of public service that I think in this generation has really been rising to the top. And we see more and more of that, and of concern about where our country is going. Governor O'Malley, you've seen, I know, Teach for America very actively
Absolutely.
Involved in Baltimore and in Maryland.
Done great stuff in Baltimore. Every year I've welcomed those kids.
Despite, you know, inherent union friction, you've resolved it, or it
Yeah,
is
we didn't
being
really
resolved.
find much. We didn't really find a whole lot of friction. It was my experience during the 7 years that I served the people of Baltimore as their mayor. I made a point of welcoming the new teachers every year. Some of them were Teach for America kids. Others were, some of them were immigrants. Others were out of our teaching colleges. But we didn't find a whole lot of friction where Teach for America is concerned. We found them to be a real kind of catalyst, if you will, a shot in the arm, a way to up everybody's game, and perhaps maybe to remind some of the veteran teachers about the passion that first led them to go into the classroom to begin with. So we've had overall a very good experience with our Teach for America, and also, I might say, with our public unions. I mean, we were never named the best public schools in America before, but we achieved that distinction for 5 years in a row now, and our test scores continue to go up. We actually started listening to teachers and implementing the sort of 180s, you know, the teacher surveys that North Carolina led the way on. So we could hear from the people that were actually the practitioners and the implementers, what are the things that work in the classroom that we can do more of? What are the things we can untangle from a bureaucratic standpoint that get in your way? And that's a very positive dialogue that we need to continue to do more and more of.
Now, Carl, you mentioned money, but budget cuts, particularly I know in the District of Columbia and our school system here, have been pretty deeply felt, and the sequester is only making it worse. And the first thing that goes in our city are music and art and things that are considered, quote, extracurricular, but that I consider a profoundly important part of education, of the complete person. There was a Peterson Foundation poll 2 weeks ago, and 70% rather of Americans said that improving national security would be an important benefit of reducing debt. Now, is there a peace benefit, a peace bonus? We haven't seen this in the past. Admiral, what is your take on
You're
that?
searching for those 2 wonderful words, peace dividend.
Yes.
I would argue that we didn't get much of one when the wall fell down, even though we took it at the time. So I just want to be, you know, I want to be very, very careful with respect to that. I'm one from a defense standpoint that have said for some time, we can't afford to reduce the amount of money the Pentagon's spending. Now, we can't afford to do too many sequesters. You can't afford using that mechanism, which is brutal and across the board, and can't fit any kind of thinking strategy about, well, what do we want to do for our national security? What is our strategy and how are we going to resource it? So I think we can do that if we can figure out a way to do it sensibly and in conjunction with understanding what does America want to do with respect to its national security requirements. The other thing we need from that point of view is we actually need sort of a guiding strategy about what we're going to do. My own view is I think that we're going to focus on Asia, on China and India and that part of the world. As much as we'd like to not focus on the Middle East, that's not going away. We're going to continue to be required to be involved in the Middle East. And in a constrained budget, and if it continues, we're not going to be able to do much in places like Latin America, like Africa, and along the lines of what I was just listening to with the healthcare debate or discussion beforehand, is we're not going to be able to do much preventative work, which is what we need to do in terms of being out, being engaged, and not being isolated in a world that I don't think will accept an isolationist approach in the next 10, 20, 30 years.
And the sequester is such a blunt instrument
Right.
in a defense budget, which is, first of all, so much made up of personnel costs and health costs. It's basically, as I think Bob Gates once said, he's running a health care system. And also, the lead times on these weapon systems are so long that once they're started, Carly, just as a matter of basic business judgment, it's very hard to stop something where you've already spent several billion. You know, when is it the right point to sort of cut your losses?
I think that everyone would agree, and certainly I'm not an expert, although I have served in an advisory capacity to the Defense Department and intelligence agencies, and it's pretty clear that everyone agrees that there is room for more intelligence spending. The tooth-to-tail ratio in the Pentagon is not what it should be, as an example, but that requires, given all of the requirements for congressional requirements that are placed on the Pentagon, it requires a strategy. It requires very careful decision-making, very careful investment. I would say this. I do think that there is an opportunity here, as the Admiral correctly points out, that the military in a budget-constrained environment is going to be focusing its investments on hot spots as opposed to preventative maintenance. There is an opportunity to engage the private sector and the philanthropic sector in a strategic alliance around the use of soft power. What do I mean by that? If you look at what China is doing, for example, in places like Africa or in places like Latin America, it's not their military that's going in. What's going in are companies that are investing. If you look at the amount of money that goes into the developing world today, where it used to be 87% of it was government money, now 87% of the money that goes into developing economies to be spent on development is private sector money. Philanthropy, private sector, for-profit companies. And so I think if we think about this holistically, in other words, what are all the assets that the United States of America has at our disposal? We have a military. We have a vibrant and innovative private sector. We have one of the most generous philanthropic peoples in the world. If we can think about using all of those assets to engage around the world, I think we can have a greater and more positive impact in a budget-constrained time. And there are lots of examples of this. We just need to do more of it, I think.
And one of the ways so that we are obviously spending more and more money is on Homeland Security. Governor O'Malley, after Boston, how does that affect your budgeting and your long-range planning for state and local law enforcement?
Well, I found Boston very fascinating in terms of the capacities that we saw in play after the bombing and during the response that we did not have in play during the attacks of September 11th and immediately thereafter. In our state, we've been working to build up 12 basic capacities. One of those has to do with interoperability of communications. Another one's biosurveillance. Another one is surge capacity. Another one is the CCTV networks that no cities had 10 years ago, that all cities have to some degree now. And you saw all of these, or many of these, deployed in Boston. You saw the surge capacity, and you saw their ability to treat so many people that were injured with such a low loss of life. You saw the CCTV cameras, that without which there would not have been the forensic capacity to apprehend those that had committed these crimes. And you also saw, to a degree, interoperability, how much it's improved and how much more we still have to do. The danger that we face, and I saw Lee Hamilton, I think former Congressman Hamilton talking about this, is complacency. For the next 100 years, we are going to be fighting here in the homeland asymmetrical opponents, some of them lone wolves like the ones that attacked us in Boston, and we cannot be complacent and pretend that this is something that's merely an East Coast phenomenon, or this is something that only happened 10 years ago. So we are getting better, but we still have to build up our capacities, and we're not going to create interoperable communications off of fire hall bingos and bake sales at the FOP Lodge. I mean, these are things that we will only have if we invest in them. And so, I think there's tremendous opportunities, and I think those opportunities also have a dual purpose. As we've been investing in these capacities, we've also been able to drive crime down in some places like Maryland to 30-year lows. That's not accidental. That's not because there's more jobs now than there were. That's because we've become much smarter and better at protecting our public spaces and using technology in smart ways in the hands of first responders.
And how much do we have to invest in cybersecurity? How much more than what we already are? Let me ask all of you. Admiral?
If I could just say, the only thing I'd like to add to this is it was said time and time again about how these agencies work together. When you've been in an agency, as I have for most of my adult life, that work was extraordinary. And we were nowhere at 9/11, relatively speaking.
That's right.
The efforts that have gone into being able to generate that kind of output have just been unbelievable across our government at every level, not just the federal or just the state or local level.
Let me just say parenthetically to that point, and I know there's been criticism of the CIA and the FBI not communicating and not sharing and still stovepiping, but I was landing at 10 of 3 that day with Secretary Kerry after a flight from Tokyo. And we were landing in Chicago, where he was paying a condolence call on the parents of Ann Smedinghoff, the young Foreign Service officer killed in Afghanistan. And of course, Secretary Kerry, being a Massachusetts person and a senator, and his daughter working at Mass General and living right there and often going to the marathon, his first immediate concern was calling home. But I got off the plane at exactly 5 of 3. So the event had happened 5 minutes earlier. And an airport policeman was driving me to the other side of the airport to do a live report for NBC. On an interview I had just done with the secretary in Tokyo. And on his radio was, "We are in lockdown now at the airport." 5 minutes later in Chicago, because of Homeland and because of all of the communications, this would never have happened after 9/11. There were police cars everywhere surrounding Kerry's plane, surrounding us. And it was just a symptom of what was happening in LA, in New York, and everywhere within minutes.
I might also, could I just also add that I think what we saw demonstrated by the American people, in particular our fellow citizens in Boston, was a tremendous resilience that you did not see us exhibit after 9/11. I mean, I recall everybody almost being apprehensive about even going out of their homes for several days or
that
gathering in groups.
paralysis did not exist.
Right. That did not happen this time in Boston. And that's another really positive psychological development.
But Admiral, I interrupted you when you were talking, also responding on cybersecurity.
I don't think I answered your question.
And what that threat is, because only in the last couple of days we've seen an even more direct reference to Chinese national culpability, according to the U.S. government.
There's nowhere I go that I don't talk about this. I think it's the most severe threat that we have. I think it's existential to our way of life. I think, and it is a very potent threat. And I've been on the inside and fought this and seen it, so I have some understanding of that. we're in decent shape on the military side. We're okay on the government side. We got a long way to go in what I call the dot-com world. And if I took a dozen CEOs to China to see the senior leadership in China, the only thing those CEOs would say, stop stealing our intellectual capacity, which they need actually to grow their economy at 7 or 7.5%. And if they fall off that bicycle, for whatever reason, the world's going to have a problem. It's not going to be just in China. So it is a very, very devastating threat. People don't know it well enough. I was actually with somebody the other night who has sort of lived in this business through the creation of the internet. And he made a comment to me that in order to really get this right, we need to start over. We need to build a new internet that is secure from the beginning, as opposed to, and if any of you have ever tried to marry one IT system up to another, it's very expensive. It's really turf-oriented, and it's almost, in the end, it's almost impossible. And what I try to do is talk to what I call line leaders about this. They need to understand it as well as their technical experts, because they make decisions on who they hire, they make decisions on what the policy is, and they make decisions about where investments go. And it's only going to get much harder before it gets easier. So, I mean, this is a threat that could shut down our transportation system, our financial system, our electric grid, et cetera. There are hackers in this, there are criminals in this, there are governments in this. It's a very complex space that we actually, through the last couple of administrations, have started to invest in heavily. But we have a long way to go to understand how to actually address this. And this is something that I believe, and President Obama is all over this, that President Obama and President Xi Jinping are going to have a lot of conversations about to get it right between our countries.
I think there is no doubt that China has been a state sponsor of cyber hacking for quite some time. No doubt. And the Admiral is absolutely correct that in addition to that, there are hackers and criminals and all kinds of other people. There is also no doubt that the only way for us as a nation to truly combat this is not only for there to be, obviously, the political awareness and will, but a real public-private partnership around this, because so much of our infrastructure is in the hands of the private sector. Third, however, I do think that we need to rethink our approach to China completely. We spend a lot of energy talking to China about things that they will not pay attention to. They pay no attention to our discussions about human rights. They have a different calculation about the value of individual freedom versus what they would describe as collective progress, and we will not influence that. They pay no attention to our discussions about currency manipulation. They believe we are manipulating our own currency. They believe we are manipulating our own stock markets. I happen to agree with them on that, but that's a different issue. We're wasting our breath. What we need to be talking to them about in a consistent manner with real consequence is things that attack their economic self-interest. It was huge progress today, in my opinion, that we actually said formally, yes, the Chinese government is a state sponsor of cyber hacking, and we need to keep that conversation way up on the front burner in public and make it the centerpiece of every conversation we have with them.
Governor O'Malley, as a governor in a state, I know you have nuclear facilities, you have other intense national security facilities in the state, so you have to be very concerned.
Sure. We were talking earlier about core capacities that states and cities need to develop in terms of homeland security, and certainly cybersecurity is one of those. It was not one of those that we immediately started pursuing after the attacks of September 11th, but it is one that we've added in terms of critical infrastructure. All of the things that have been said, being true, in our state, we have embraced cybersecurity not only as a threat that we need to mitigate against and do the things internally, call upon our National Guard expertise to help us and do all of those things, but we also see it, Andrea, as a leading pillar of our new innovation economy. We had the the fourth best first quarter job growth in our state this year, and one of the stronger sectors was IT and cyber. So along with life science and biotech and a few other things, we have determined that we will make Maryland the epicenter for cybersecurity. NSA is already there. There's innovative and private companies. And so we look upon this not only as the threat that it is, but also as a great economic opportunity and job generator.
It's a huge
We
opportunity.
only have
Absolutely
less
right.
than a minute left. If I could do a lightning round and go down the row and ask if there's one thing that you could invest in to increase our competitiveness and advance our educational system globally, what would that be?
Teachers.
Teachers.
Teachers and I think we have to get the government's role right in innovation. The government has a very important role to play in innovation. It can invest in what I would call platform innovations like ARPANET, which turned into the internet. But what the government is bad at doing is making venture capital investments because they throw too much money too fast at, in many cases, the wrong players. So in addition to education, we have to get our innovation policy right. And that means creating a risk-reward ratio that's going to work for entrepreneurs. I would say the risks of failure are too high right now and the rewards for success are too low for many entrepreneurs. That's why 70% of them think the federal government is hostile to them in a recent poll in the Washington Post. But we have to have the government playing the right role and investing substantially more money than it does today in platform innovations that are vital to our competitiveness.
We're going to have to leave it there. Our thanks to Carly Fiorina and Governor O'Malley and Admiral Mike Mullen. Thank you all so much. And our thanks, my thanks, to Peter G. Peterson, his foundation, and of course, Michael Peterson for having us here. Thank you all.